This video is brought to you by Iron Jock, clothing for active performance, made with silver ion technology for maximum odor-fighting protection. Visit ironjock.com and get 20% off using the promo code HITBOMBS. Iron Jock, it's what's inside.
Scott Lynn, Dr. Scott Lynn, biomechanist.
Biomechanist. Sounding fancy.
All right. Well, I'm a long driver, not an English major here, Justin. All right, so he's gonna break down Justin's swing catalyst capture. I think this is really interesting, and the thing that's really interesting to me is this was a world I started kind of playing around in last year. And there's not much data, especially at our speeds. You know, you compare it to the tour guys, you see certain things, but at the same time, you go back and you have to remind yourself, we're faster than them. Not saying that in a negative way. It's just the reality of it. Scott, I'll let you kind of run through this and just talk about some of the stuff you see from your expertise.
Right, well, I would see for sure, I mean, the first thing I always look at is the kind of the dominant ground reaction force pattern, and for him it's vertical force. So he produces the most we've ever seen on the plate. I believe you just clipped your previous record too. But I think you're about 300 when you're at Liam's place in Canada, whatever that was, 2-3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And you got 302% there. So that's like 695 pounds of vertical force, 700 pounds of vertical force.
How much do you weigh?
220.
So he's more than doubling that.
It's tripling.
Yeah.
Not a math major.
Not an English math. Forgot to introduce Tim. So Tim is with Swing Catalyst as well.
That's always been your thing, right? Like you've always had tons of vertical force. And I think the special part about this is the rate at which you get to that peak. So it goes up at a really steep rate. So that's called the rate of force development. So that's something that obviously to get high speeds, you have to produce forces at high rates of speed, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's what, so that speed being produced at such a high rate, so the steepness of how it climbs to that peak is, I mean, you don't see that. That's world class. I've never seen it before. At that steepness and that rate, or that amount is massive. The couple things we see, I think something that, I don't know if it was, Kyle that started this trend, is this kind of rocking back and forth. I mean, he was the first one that I saw literally rock back and forth. Yeah, dramatically. So you can see it as you're setting up to it, and it's not as dramatic, but your feet are pushing quite significantly. Like you're getting actually more horizontal force in your little rock-in drill, so you see how you're like above the tour average there.
This helps, like, I've noticed get some tension out, mm-hmm. and when I do that, I'll notice a little less tension and a little bit of a speed jump.
Cool.
Whereas I'm just because I told Judd, like I've been coached, like, hey, let's 60-40 load the right side.
Yeah.
If I was playing for a living, you probably want to do that.
Sure.
But when I'm trying to sling it, if I just looser.
Yeah.
I used to do that when I hit too, even like in Little Leagues, rock.
Sure.
And it just kind of helps flush out the tension before I pull the trigger.
That's awesome.
It's important.
And it goes back and forth quite a bit. And then the last one where you get to this negative horizontal force right here, this is where you're pushing off the left foot and creating a reaction force that's literally shoving your pelvis or your whole body away from the target. And then you have to, the first part of this horizontal force as you take the club away is now your right foot trying to decelerate that horizontal momentum you've created. So now it's pushing back in this direction, but it's just decelerating. So I think this first part is you decelerating, and then your left foot comes off the ground. So you're doing the swing where literally the left toe is not touching at all anymore, and that's when the pressure plate freaks out.
That's been a struggle of mine too, like, examining the swings, and it's a lot of swings I like, but you just don't know. So there's more data needed, obviously.
Sure, 100%. Because that's what we were talking about. Because we were talking about Drew's swing. Mm-hmm. I'd worked with Drew quite a bit, and we're looking at Kyle and comparing him to Drew. And Dana are like, I don't know. It's the only person I know that I have data on that swings at that fast, or near that fast.
Yeah, and you look at Rory or you look at whoever it is. Like if they really went all out, could they produce that kind of? You just don't know.
You don't know.
Right? So you don't want to replicate something. You don't want to chase ghosts.
Right.
So that's why it's difficult to do.
100%. And I think the more often we do this, and because your guys' swings change all the time, right? You say, sometimes I leave my heel down, sometimes I do this, sometimes I do that. The more data we get, the more we're going to be able to learn. But and so this little blip here is probably where that right foot hits, or the left foot hits back down again. So that's, and then the next blip in your horizontal force is going to be where you're actually pushing off. And the interesting thing is you don't get a massive amount of that. So you're middle of the tour average, which is, I mean, there's still a lot of force there compared to what a tour player would get. I mean, if you...
Now, where is that force right now?
in which foot?
What are we talking where I'm middle of the pack?
The horizontal force, so that's like pushing side to side.
Is this point, that's going left?
The reaction force is going towards the target, yeah.
Okay, so I could glide harder, is that what we're saying?
I mean, you could shove more, and that's what we worked on with you, right? We were pulling you away from the target. So a good way to teach you to push your right foot in the ground more and create more of this horizontal force would be to like put a band around you. So if I like wrapped a band around your waist and was standing back here and I like literally pulled you in that direction, like you got to learn how to push.
Well, that is like where I'll go wrong is I get to my right side, stay back there, get steep and over the top.
Interesting. Yeah.
Rather than
getting going, yeah, because that is a shallower for sure. That horizontal force is going to drop the club. Yeah, and what I find is, I mean, the shittier the player, the more likely it is that they have tons of glide and nothing else, right? Because that's the easy, I mean, that is, the classic, the sway that you see in a lot of crappy players. And the thing is, when you have a lot of a glide, you have to have the brakes to stop it, because that transfers the energy to the club. And if you don't have the brakes to stop it, then putting a lot in is kind of counterproductive.
I have the brakes.
You have the brakes. I just think your nervous system freaks out here. And my hypothesis would be that's your oblique saying, whoa, dude.
I'm asking questions like a 2-year-old. It was the first time. So with Liam, we had like 3 hours. We didn't have time to like sit down and actually.
Right.
Yeah.
So talk about the pressure, Scott. So what's interesting is so go to the top, go back a little bit, right? So right about here, about left arm parallel, he's actually got 100% pressure on the trail foot. That's where his left foot starts to completely come off the ground. And then as he gets to the top.
But what I really like here is there's a dot of red pressure on the inside of his heel. So like he's pushing on the inside of his heel, and I can see a dot of pressure kind of where his big toe would be.
Okay.
So that means the pressure is spread out over the entire foot, where you'll find a lot of people when they get moving off the ball like that, they roll the outside of that foot. And I mean, my analogy to them is if you're covering me in football and I make a move to this way and I get you the outside of that foot and I go this way, like I win. Yeah, you can't go back. And so that's something that I think it's hard to recover from, and a lot of golfers get in that position where they rock to the outside.
Long drivers do that.
Yeah.
It's hard, when you're making that big of a swing, it's hard to not sway
a hair.
Has that ever been an emphasis of you, like trying to keep the weight on a certain part of the foot?
Well, I always try to stay inside here just because I'm an athlete. I know that if I'm pitching, that just makes sense. Like if I'm there, I'm done. I drill that with that stick drill, and I think obviously Hogan buckled that in a little bit. I'll have an emphasis with these to stay on the on the inside with the squares.
Do you feel it more into the ball or into the heel?
I try to stay inside heel because I'm trying to push back into the heel. I'm trying to push my right hip back.
Okay. Right. Interesting.
And some of the stuff I just do naturally. I drill it intentionally, so I do it naturally.
But you don't think about it in your swing. That's,
So then as he gets to the top, right, the interesting thing is that he actually has, so at the very peak of his backswing, so go back a little bit, he's actually got 60.
He's probably, I don't know where the backswing ends really, because it's hard to.
So arguably 50-50 for the sake of conversation.
Like recentered, and that's kind of what Dana talks about now, right? Is getting off of it and then recentering and then pushing from there, and it makes sense because you're now using both of your legs instead of just one, right? If you were 80% on your lead side, you'd be only really able to use one leg there. So
I always use the analogy, like I feel like you have to. And it's a fine line, right? But you don't want to be too late to the lead side because then you got nothing to push off of. Yeah. You got to get back somewhat early.
It is 100%. And as with anything in golf, you can be too much and too soon. And
I'd like to get even earlier. Like I think
to your left side.
Yeah. Kyle does well. Jamie did well. you know, like Russell Knox, he does that naturally well. I think it's just really hard when you don't get back there early. You know, like in Alaska wanted me to get there earlier. Like that's the one thing he really tried to drill in with me.
One way to get there earlier, and this is what you talked about, leaving the heel down, you gain some speed sometimes, because what I would do if I had a really shitty player who was getting like 100% into their trail side, we call that a very right leg dominant swing. Because in the tour players we've looked at, we have the maximum amount of pressure they get into their trail side is a good indicator of how much they're using each leg. So 100, you can't do more than 100, right? And we did have JB Holmes as one of the tour players that has like 100%, so he gets really far off of it and moves horizontally. But like Cameron Champ and guys are like 50, 60. Like they don't really move off of it much, which makes it way easier to go forward. Yeah. So I would argue that if you kept this foot down, this wouldn't get to 100. This would probably get to, I don't know,
yeah.
80
and
or
if
90.
I was playing for a living, I'd probably be more like Cameron.
Right.
You know, and
that's what makes sense.
Like him too, like hit the low stingers.
That's what makes sense with the vertical force, right? Because if you stay stacked on this leg, then you have to use vertical. So that's your maximum, or that's your dominant ground reaction force pattern there. So I would say that you're probably more left leg dominant. Like if you're going up for a jump or a layup, you'd probably jump off your left, I would say.
Scott, so as he reaches the top of his backswing now, from what you kind of chatted with me about, you want the vertical or the horizontal peaking, the left to right, and then you want the vertical peaking.
No, next is the torque, that rotational force. Yeah.
So talk about the next part, like the torque. Talk about his torque.
So this is where, I mean, the torque is, I don't remember what it was when you swung at Liam's, whether it was massive or not, but it's still, I mean, it's the top of the tour average plus 1 standard deviation, so it's, I mean, there's only, I don't know what that would be.
Torque or weave?
Torque is like forward and backward, so you're pushing your, I mean, you'll see a lot, you know, a back foot will slip, right? So you're...
And I can put more torque in there, like...
Yeah.
I just don't know, I haven't sequenced it up. Like, I won't hit it well.
Right.
Right? So I feel like I can add one thing at a time.
Yeah, no, totally.
So I think there's some room to improve there. And then definitely room to improve, like, using that left side more through impact. You know.
I think the left side, I mean, the left side vertical is unbelievable. The way you push off, and actually we don't even know, because vertical could come from the right foot as well. Because the pressure does bounce back onto your right foot when you produce that vertical. So you're producing it 40% from the right foot as well. And that's where, if we got that left foot producing more of that vertical and more of that braking, the horizontal braking force, then that, my hypothesis would be that would add speed. And I think you have the potential to produce a lot of braking force, but it's just happening late, and that could be the oblique.
So how would I get it there early? Would it be getting a left side earlier? Or?
There's lots of different ways you can play with. I mean, one thing Mike would do if forces are late, he would square up your left foot, and you've actually turned it in more, so I don't think we'd want to do that more. So there's lots of different ways to, and that's something you just have to play with. I mean, preloading it earlier, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can, or just kind of getting, I mean, I would say that once this thing, that's your brain freaking out here, so once that thing heals up and you're not freaking out anymore, I'd like to see where it goes, because that could just be a result of the injury.
If you go to impact, if you would. Like, I want that left hip, keep going. Like, that's not bad. And like I said, I just get a little drifty where, you know, I'll almost have...
The left hip goes way this way?
Yeah. So if that left hip was clearly behind my left heel and I was pushing harder, that's where more force would come from. You.
That would be more torque, right? So that left hip is back here more, you mean? Like back...
Yeah.
There more?
Or just more of this at impact rather than, you know, kind of...
Sliding through, yeah. That would be more of that horizontal braking force happening sooner, for sure.
And so you think that would produce more speed, though?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. Because that's like, I mean, I think it was, what was it, what's his name there? The European that's coaching Rory now?
Pete Cowan.
He was in here during the Players' Championship weekend. He's like, oh, I get that, because I was talking about the braking force. And he's like, he showed me this. He's like, so like if I stop this, what happens to this? Whew. Right? So if you break that first, then it'll probably release from, you know, so if this lower body breaks, then the arms and the club will probably release faster.
When you say brake, are you talking about like
posting?
I mean, it's where you, and it doesn't happen till like way over here, but like you're trying to push the ground like towards the target, and the ground's shoving you backwards. And that's where, if I have like a, you'll see often amateurs where they come into impact, right, and their lead leg looks like that, like where they're like way past it, then I'll go down the line and have them make a practice swing and pull them towards the target, and they got to learn how to, Who did that?
Alaska.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I want, that's just what I struggle with.
Right, so that would be a good drill for sure. I would argue that, I mean, you already have lots of brakes, like you produce a ton of them. Like that's a massive amount of braking force. You have 95 pounds or 40% of your body weight of like shearing. It's just happening so late and that could be a result of the injury. That's your brain just.
So lastly, talk about his verticals, because I think you just said that he has the record now for verticals ever measured on a swing catalyst.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen 302% before.
302%. So he's generating 694. Is that pounds? Is that pounds or newtons?
Pounds. So we have it in units people can understand.
Pounds,
Yeah.
of course. So Justin is
So Josh can
like
understand.
700 pounds of force of vertical. That's like.
Impressive.
Tim, do the math for me. What is that? How many?
See, 3 times. Yeah, if you weigh over 200 pounds and it's over 600, it's just.
It's more than 3 times your body weight. Yeah.
3 times his body
Don't want
weight.
to give your weight away.
Yeah.
Over
So, and that's just him really kind of pushing off the ground.
Yeah, and the interesting part is he produces it kind of like 60-40 off the right and off the left.
60 off the left.
Yeah, 40 off the right, where, I mean, most standard golf instruction would say, no, you want to be 80% on your left side, but I don't know if that's the case with you. Like, that's the thing. I've seen people get more left and swing it slower, swing it worse. Like, it's possible that works for you. I mean,
So I'm 60 left.
40 right.
At this point, right?
What? Yeah, when you're producing that max vertical.
Just the pressure.
And in theory, I'd want to be more.
That, I mean, that's like the ideal model from
Yeah.
whatever a million years ago, but like what we're finding is everyone's different. And like technically if you got 80, that could slow you down. That could make something else happen bad. Like there's so many things that could affect it. But to me, the special part of this is just the rate at which it gets to that 300. Like how steeply it goes up is insane. Like that's nuts.
Crazy.
Yeah. That can't be taught or trained, I don't think. That's just inherent in his DNA. Like, I mean, yeah, you could take, I mean, look at the tour average, it's way down here. Like, that's what normal humans produce, and you're almost double it, I would say. I mean, that's, you can see what it, top of the tour average for vertical is like 200%. So not double it, but yeah, you're more like a third more than most of the tour guys. So that's why the tour guys complain when you come here.
That's why they're not hitting balls.
They're not flying it back in here.
By the way, we just got kicked out, or not kicked out, but we had to stop because there's some
tour players that were getting bombarded by Titleists. All right, so that, I mean, this is the only thing that I see that's looking a little inefficient is this braking force and this, because when you produce forces at this frequency, that's not a normal force production. That's generally a nervous system freaking out because something's.
At what point this one?
This is like right where that vertical force peaks. So where you try to go vertical is generally where, or this is where I've seen in Kyle, is where this big massive spike of braking occurs. Mm-hmm. So his braking force occurred right with that big vertical peak. So you'd think I'm pushing that foot down and towards the target, and it's creating that force. Like you're 300% of your body weight, so it's like this massive big force up this way. And I think your body's trying to put the brakes on there, but then whatever. There's
Yeah, if he were to
in the
work on that and actually get the brakes to work, it's potential that his pressure would be more closer to maybe 80-20.
It could be, yeah. But again, will that speed you up? I have no idea. There's like human beings are so messy that like, you know, we try to if you try to teach the same thing to every single person, you know, it could make one person better, one person worse, and do nothing to somebody else. So,
But you see a pressure difference.
Right. You might, yeah. That could definitely be the case. And that's the thing, we'll learn more with our dual plate as well. I don't even know, like, is it possible to create braking force from your right? I guess it could be. Like, you could be dragging that foot and creating some braking force from the right. That's what I mean, I always assume it comes from the left, but on the single plate, you don't know for sure. Like,
Yeah.
because you do have a lot of pressure on your right, so it could be creating some braking force itself, because we're just getting the net of what both your feet are doing. So once we get the duals, we can see what individual contribution.
So if you just look at this like objectively, like me not being world long drive champion, but if it was just a guy, where would you say, okay, you have an opportunity for more speed here? It would be in the glide?
Yeah, well, in the braking to the glide, because this, whenever I see this, as I said, that like frequency of like, that's a nervous system that's just like freaked out for some reason.
So, but generally speaking, lead side earlier and harder?
Yeah, well, the earlier I think would probably happen if the brain didn't freak out because the injury is happening. So the earlier, I don't know, because like when I think of all the things that Mike Adams would teach somebody to make forces happen earlier, like you're already doing most of them. I mean, so the foot turned in, he would close somebody's stance, because closing somebody's stance will get you to post up earlier through that lead side, because you can't turn through it as much. So I don't know. I mean, it looks like you're maybe a hair shut to it. I don't know. Yeah. So those are all the things like the standard like go-tos to make a force happen earlier. But I mean, I would be weary of that because these verticals are getting close to being too early. Because we always say verticals need to be somewhere between left arm parallel and club parallel. And you're at you are almost too early with that. So,
yeah, okay.
And it's possible to be too early for sure. I mean, with long drive guys, we generally see forces happening earlier because the downswing is just so damn short. Like there's no time. Yeah, the swing speed's so fast.
163?
This one, I mean, the club speed was 157, I believe. We had one where you're 160, but you thought it was a misread. Yeah, that was 150. But if you look, I mean, the forces of the 160 swing were actually not quite as high as the ones that we just saw there. And it was interesting that you felt that. Because I looked through several of your swings as you were hitting, you're like, oh, that one was good, and I'd click on it, and none of them got to 300% verticals until you're like, hey, look at that one. Like when they
I think something a little different
Yeah.
that I played with is, and when I was hitting it really hard last year, I feel like, this should in theory be wrong, but for some reason I stumble on it. Like I feel like I get here and go to hip extension like that way.
Okay.
And for some reason I get a little jump. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't teach that. But
No, that's like.
I think as I'm rotating and I feel that it maybe helps put the brakes on or something. But
cool. No, I like it. Because this was the one that measured in at 160 club speed. And you can see I mean, it's not horrible. It's still 288 vertical.
yeah, and those are hit like well, but like I said, just if I just look at the monitor and I can feel it and then I see it and then I know, okay, now it's clicking.
Right.
It's very subtle, but like the difference in 5 and 6 miles an hour is like extremely subtle, and that's why like for speed training, like you've got to have a consistent system, and like there's nothing better than a quad. So like people. If you have a launch motor that bounces, you can't,
You just don't
because
know.
1,
Right.
2, 3 miles an hour is the difference in the right sequence and the wrong. It's got to be right to the mile an hour exact every
Sure.
time.
Right.
No, that makes tons of sense. And I think the same thing with the forces, right? You have to make sure that they are accurate, and it looks pretty similar. Like all the stuff looks the same. There's this little freak out here, same thing. So. But whatever you do, I mean, and that little move you do, like
Yeah,
that's
like
literally,
very subtle,
it's
right?
very
But
subtle, but it would be
that
what
one was-
TPI would consider to be early extension, right? Like
213, and that
Right.
that next one was 214. So that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's mile per hour per. And then if we would have been able to keep going, I think I could have 15 and
Sure.
maybe stretch. Just with these subtle moves, and
Yeah.
I think the plates would reflect that.
Sure it would,
More
yeah.
force here than-
Well, and I think what that move to me, hip extension, is vertical force. That's how you create vertical. Like if I wanted to shove into the ground, I would extend my hip. And that created another, whatever it was, 12%, 14% verticals, which resulted in another mile an hour ball speed. I think the 60 was off in terms of the club speed. I don't know, but so you always look at ball speed. You think it's
Yeah, I mean, because of the smash, look at the smash. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not a 133, right? So, like I said, if that's down, and it's a result of balls too. Like I say, if we go to a very, very hard ball, because a Pro V is not designed for 155 mile an hour swing speed, so the smash factor is not going to be high.
Right.
So 130 compression is more in that target range. So people are always like, oh, GC quad, the smash is always low. I think it's kind of reflecting reality.
Right.
You know, so if you're 185 ball speed, you can start to get those high smashes. But as you move in, you know, a big debate in long drives is the ball. What's more productive for actual distance, the 225 ball speed or 215? Because those guys shouldn't be able to hang with each other, but on TV the last few years they have.
The 215 guys hung with the
because there's a big are we overloading the ball?
Oh wow!
Because
You're just squashing the ball
I
instead
mean,
of
if you look like
a ball. Yeah, a ball is. I mean, if you think about it, a ball is going to be optimal for a single player for the most part,
so
right?
I believe, you know, before the AMT, that range is probably 210 to 215. Maybe a little high, but I mean that's a 110 compression ball or whatever. So you know, optimal for that might be 140, 145 swing speed. You take that to 150, 155. You're gonna need higher compression, right?
Sure.
It's just like a guy that plays a Pro V versus an X, you know, versus a lady playing a, you know,
the AVX or
a
whatever.
noodle,
Right.
So some people are gonna hit a chrome soft farther, right? Because it's that, and you nuke them with irons, right? But when you hit it with a driver, so it's the same deal. So
do you all have to use the same ball in the long drive?
yeah, but I don't like that. I think it would be super intriguing if all of a sudden they said, bring your own ball.
Right.
And now Volvic would design a ball just for me, and Callaway might have a ball for, or whatever. Get all these manufacturers involved. And that would be fair in a sense, because some of these guys, like, it matched up perfectly for them.
Right.
And the year they changed the ball, the guy that won World, he was mad.
Yeah.
Because he's had a lot of success with it.
Right.
So.
Is this what they use now, these ones, or no?
They're using a Top Flight right now. They were using a Volvic AMT in the last year, WLD, so it's kind of whoever hops on board and sponsors it. But AMT got it close in terms of the right compression. The matte finish is debatable. Downwind, that matte finish is nasty because it catches air. It's going to go
spun more.
forever. Yeah, well, it's just like, I don't know, is a dimple pack, like, it's just thick.
There's so many.
So if it catches air, you know.
There's so many variables there.
I don't think there's ever been a faster ball than AMT.
But that could be the case. Like, they could just change from Volvic to Top Flight and you'd be screwed because that doesn't match you.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Wow.
But, I mean, you can't, some guys will say, okay, well, I'll only swing 140. I've never really seen that pay off. You still got to go at it.
Right.
There's so many variables in this deal.
But 215 ball speed can beat 225 ball speed.
Yeah. With turf conditions, and honestly, you get to final 8. It's a coin flip. Right. Josh got beat first event. He went 223, 220. The other guy went 215. So you tell me.
Right.
So in turf conditions, the wind comes up a little bit, wind comes down. You hit a hard spot, you hit a soft spot.
Right.
Obviously, launch angle and spin, which you control that the best you can. But there's a ton of variables.
That's actually the cool thing about long drive is like, depending on what conditions are at hand, like, you have to make adjustments.
Right.
It's, now I will say this, more times than not, you will see guys with speed show up in the finals. Like,
yeah, of course.
But at the end of the day, when it comes down to winning, you better be able to adjust for what's on hand that given day. So, well, I think that this is really cool to look at. Last thoughts, Scott, before we jump over to mine.
I mean, I think, as you said before, like, swing to swing, the variations are so small between winning and losing. And so I think getting this technology and being measured more often, because, like, I mean, we have Kyle from 18, 19, I don't even remember, before the pandemic. I mean, you've been on this, 4 years ago at Liam's. And, like, but that's the thing, like, now that, we start getting plates in more places where you can measure this more often and see how little differences are changing, because there are very small things. Like, you might come back in a week and have keep your foot on the ground and not turn it out as much, and that changes everything. And that could get you 2 more miles an hour, which is the difference between winning and losing. So, and getting to understand this more is super important, because like I said before, I was working with Drew on the plate with Dana, and we're like, I don't know, man, let's look at Kyle, because like he's the only person we have on my system that is swinging anywhere near that speed. And so now we have 4 more guys, and so as we get more people there, and it'd be super cool. I mean, I don't know if they would ever allow us to have a plate like in competition. That'd be super cool if it was just.
All right, guys, if you enjoyed that video, be sure to hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Are you subscribed yet?
No.
You better. You'll be famous on our channel.
I don't go to YouTube.
And shout out to our sponsors, Iron Jock, Silver Ion Technology. These things don't stink. They're lightweight, and we can move pretty well on them. So.
And go to swingcatalyst.com. You can download Justin's swing and review it for yourself.
Buy as many copies as you can so that he
That's right.
gets
buy
rich.
more Bitcoins.
$1, basically a diaper per buy.
There you go. There you go.
Diaper inflation.
All right, guys. We'll see you next time.